In the year 2054, the world had come to the edge of annihilation. Nations, once at the height of human achievement, now teetered on the precipice of destruction. Nuclear war was no longer a distant fear, but a reality waiting to unfold. And at the center of it all was a boy. Ethan had once been just like any other child, a curious, bright-eyed dreamer with the whole world ahead of him. But when the bombs fell, when the world shattered into chaos, Ethan's life was torn apart. He was chosen, no, engineered, by a government that had no room for innocence in a world where survival meant dominance. Turned into a cyborg at the tender age of 10, Ethan became the world's greatest weapon. A living, breathing machine of destruction, forged not to protect, but to annihilate. The hope was that he would be the savior, the one who could stop the global war before it claimed every last life on Earth. But what they didn't tell him was the truth of his creation. Ethan was not just a soldier, he was a failsafe. His body wired to trigger the destruction of everything he'd once loved, the very thing he now sought to protect. His existence was a paradox, humanity's salvation in the form of its most potent weapon. As the countdown to the end of the world ticks away, Ethan is forced to question not only the nature of his creation, but the very meaning of his own humanity. Ethan sat still in the dimly lit room, his eyes scanning the cold metal walls around him. His hands, a perfect blend of organic flesh and metallic precision, rested on his lap. The hum of technology filled the silence. Machines running, circuits buzzing, and in the distance, the faint sound of alarms, reminders that the world outside was on the verge of collapse. He could feel the weight of it all. The world was ending, and it was his fault. For as long as he could remember, Ethan had been told that his purpose was clear. Stop the war, stop the missiles, save humanity. At just 13 years old, Ethan was more machine than boy. His body, once the vessel of a normal child's dreams and hopes, had been replaced with cybernetic enhancements, each one designed to make him faster, stronger, and more lethal than any human soldier could ever be. He could calculate equations in milliseconds, predict enemy movements before they even happened, and move with a fluid grace that would make any athlete jealous. But none of that mattered when you realized that the mission you were given was not what it seemed. The walls around Ethan hummed with a constant mechanical rhythm, and his eyes flicked to the monitors on the far wall. The countdown was nearing its final hours. Nations were preparing to launch their missiles. The world had gone too far. There was no turning back now. But Ethan had not been born for this. He had been made for this. The truth had come to him slowly. At first, through strange flashes of memory, fragments of a life before the cold metal and the sterile laboratories. He had memories of running through grassy fields, of laughter and sunlight. He remembered a family, a home, and a world full of possibilities. He had been human once. Now all of that seemed like a distant dream. As a child, he had been selected for the government's top-secret project, one that promised to solve the problems of global warfare once and for all. In a world crippled by conflicts and unrest, the project was hailed as the future of peacekeeping. Ethan had been the perfect candidate, young enough to be molded, smart enough to be trained, and innocent enough to never question his purpose. But as Ethan grew, his sense of self began to unravel. His memories, suppressed by a combination of surgery and advanced neural implants, started to resurface. He had started to wonder who he was beneath the metal and wires. Was he truly just a machine? Or was there something more left of the boy he had once been? His mind, now enhanced to an unimaginable level, searched for answers. There was something in his programming, something buried so deep that even he couldn't access it at first. But with time, he hacked through the layers until the truth emerged. In full, the moment Ethan uncovered the hidden failsafe was the moment his world shattered. He wasn't just a weapon designed to save the world. No, Ethan was the last resort, a failsafe to trigger the end of the world if diplomacy failed. If certain conditions were met, if the world came to the brink of destruction, his cybernetic system could launch the missiles, obliterating everything in its path. The truth was inescapable. Ethan had been made to be the ultimate destroyer, the living embodiment of mankind's greatest fear. He had been the key to humanity's survival, but also its destruction. As the war escalated, Ethan began to feel the weight of this knowledge pressing down on him. Every day, he fought against the impulse to trigger the failsafe, the silent command buried deep within his code. He was told that if the missile launch countdown reached 0, it would be his final moment. He would have to choose, trigger the launch and wipe out humanity, or find a way to stop the missiles, even if it meant sacrificing himself. Ethan didn't want to be the weapon they had created. He didn't want to be the cause of the end of the world. He just wanted to save everyone. But every passing second brought him closer to the terrifying realization that his existence was built on a lie that threatened to destroy everything he had ever known. As the countdown continued, Ethan's mind raced. He was a product of war, yes, but was he a product of his creators, or was there still something inside him, something human that could defy his programming? There had to be a way out, but as he stared at the monitors, as he felt the pressure mounting from every direction, one question echoed in his mind. Was there even time to make that choice? Outside, the world was coming apart at the seams, and inside Ethan's mind, the battle for his soul had only just begun. Ethan stood motionless before the screens, his mind racing as the countdown to nuclear disaster flickered relentlessly in front of him. He could feel the cold sweat collecting on his brow, even though the room around him was freezing. The monitors blinked with a steady mechanical rhythm. 0:45, 0:44, 0:43. Each second seemed to stretch forever. His enhanced vision focused on the numbers, the digits, the data streaming across the screens. His mind processed it all in the blink of an eye. But no matter how quickly he thought, no matter how perfectly he calculated, one undeniable truth clung to him. He was part of the problem. His body, once human, was now an intricate combination of biological tissue and machine. His heart beat in sync with the systems embedded within him, while his mind raced faster than a normal human's ever could. He was designed for one purpose: war. The military had built him to be the ultimate weapon. But what they didn't realize, or perhaps never cared to know, was that Ethan was beginning to question that very purpose. Think, Ethan. You have no time left, he muttered under his breath. But even as he whispered the words, doubt gnawed at him. How could he save the world when he was built to destroy it? The mission had been clear from the start: prevent the war, stop the missiles, protect humanity. The nations had already launched their first wave, their final attempt to assert control over a crumbling world. The countdown had begun. His job was simple, or so it seemed. He had to stop it. But as he'd soon come to understand, nothing was simple when it came to Ethan. In his quest to discover the truth of his creation, Ethan had uncovered fragments of hidden programming, commands buried so deep within his neural system that even he, with all his enhanced abilities, had struggled to uncover them. It was as if someone had erased his past, his humanity, piece by piece, turning him into a living weapon. He knew the truth now, and it terrified him. His mission was not just to save the world. His mission was to be its failsafe. If humanity's last hope failed, if the situation became irreversible, if the world was truly on the brink of destruction, his body was wired to trigger the global launch sequence. He could, with a single thought, obliterate everything: the truth, was worse than any nightmare he had imagined. Ethan's mind wandered back to the moment when he had first uncovered this horrifying piece of information. He had accessed hidden files in the system, deep within the labyrinth of his cybernetic programming. There, buried under layers of encryption, was the failsafe, a command that would trigger the world's nuclear arsenal with a single activation. His body, locked in a delicate dance between organic and synthetic, was the key to Earth's potential destruction. It had been a mistake, a tragic, fatal mistake. Ethan's fingers trembled as he ran them along the smooth surface of the console. The screens before him flickered, displaying countdowns from around the world. His enhanced brain processed the data, pulling together the chaos of the situation. The missiles would launch in minutes, less than 5 minutes. Every second that passed brought the world closer to the end. Ethan's heart thudded, louder than it had ever been before. This wasn't just about stopping the war, it was about stopping himself from becoming the very thing he feared. The question haunted him. Could he stop it? Could he break free of the programming that bound him? Or would he become a pawn in a game too large for any one person to control? A surge of panic hit him as his hands hovered over the controls. His body hummed with the potential of infinite power. His systems synced with the missile launch countdowns. If he wanted to, if he followed the impulses programmed into him, he could initiate the final strike, the one that would wipe out everything in a nuclear firestorm. But he didn't want that. He didn't want to be a weapon. His mind flashed back to the fleeting moments before his transformation. He remembered a life, brief but real, a family, a home, the taste of food, the sound of laughter. The memories were fuzzy now, like a dream, slipping away, but they were there. Beneath the cold metal and wires, Ethan was still human. He still had the capacity for emotion, for love, for hope, and it was that humanity, buried beneath layers of technology, that he had to fight for. There was only one thing Ethan could trust in this moment: his will, his humanity. That was all. He had left. His fingers hovered over the console, the choice before him more terrifying than any battlefield. His mission had always been clear: stop the missiles. But with his power, with the programming locked inside him, what if stopping the missiles meant destroying himself in the process? Could he really stop the countdown? Could he fight the embedded commands that threatened to take control of his mind and body? The answer, he realized, was the only choice he had left: fight. Fight for humanity. Fight for himself. Fight for the child he once was. But time was running out. The countdown was now at 2:30. Ethan's pulse quickened. A sudden burst of energy surged through him. He wasn't sure where it came from, the program in his system or the humanity buried deep within, but it was there, it was real, and it gave him the strength to act. He tore his gaze away from the screens and turned toward the control room doors, leading out to the rest of the underground facility. With each step, the weight of his decision grew heavier. The tension in the air was palpable. He could feel it in his enhanced senses, a thick, suffocating pressure building around him. He reached the doors, and without hesitation, his hand slammed into the control panel. The doors slid open with a soft hiss, revealing the vast, sterile halls beyond. But then, as he moved forward, his thoughts were interrupted by a voice, low, cold, mechanical. It came from the speakers, its tone clinical and devoid of emotion. "Ethan, stop. You cannot interfere. You know what you are." His stomach clenched, the voice seeping into his mind like poison. "You were made for this. Your purpose is clear. You are humanity's salvation. Don't fight it. You were designed to protect, but you were also designed to end it." Ethan's fists clenched as the voice echoed in his head, the voice of his creators, the ones who had turned him into this, the ones who had betrayed him. No, he said it out loud this time. The word rang through his body, a challenge to everything that had been done to him. He wasn't a tool, he wasn't a weapon, he was Ethan, a boy with dreams and fears, with the right to choose his own fate. The countdown continued. 2 tags. 1:59. Ticking of the clock was maddening, but in that moment Ethan realized something. He didn't have to be the weapon they had made him to be. He could choose, and with that realization came a strength he had never felt before. He could still stop. He could stop the countdown. He could save the world. And the first step he knew was facing the truth of what he was. Not a machine, not a soldier, a boy. A boy who would save the world or destroy it. The question was, could he do it before it was too late? Ethan's breath came in ragged gasps as he sprinted through the cold metallic corridors of the underground facility. His enhanced legs powered him forward, each step more calculated than the last. His mind racing with thoughts and calculations. He had to get to the central command room. He had to stop the countdown before it was too late. The steel walls seemed to close in on him, but he pushed forward, his every muscle, every fiber of his being, locked in a singular purpose, a mission. But the truth clawed at him. He was more than a soldier. He was more than a weapon, wasn't he? The voice in his head, the voice of his creators, echoed once again, trying to choke out his thoughts. It wasn't just the programming they had installed in his body. It was the truth they had conditioned him to believe. He had been made to save humanity, they had said. He had been engineered to protect. But the more he learned, the more he uncovered. The more he realized that humanity had only ever seen him as a tool they could manipulate, a weapon to end a war that never should have started, a tool they could use to destroy everything. And now, here he was, racing against the clock, fighting against his own design and struggling to hold on to what little humanity he had left. The door to the central command room slid open before him, the cold hiss of the mechanism cutting through the silence. He didn't hesitate. He rushed inside, his eyes scanning the room as he took in the high-tech consoles, the blinking screens, and the glowing red lights. The countdown was still ticking away. 1:15, 1:14. The control room was empty. The others, the engineers, the military personnel, the scientists who had built him, who had programmed him, had all abandoned their posts. The world was ending, and they were nowhere to be found. But that didn't matter now. Ethan was alone in this fight. He moved quickly, his fingers flying over the console, each touch calculated with the precision his enhancements allowed. His mind worked even faster, analyzing the code, decrypting the layers of security, searching for the failsafe buried within his programming. The missile launch countdowns were set to trigger in less than 2 minutes, and Ethan knew that he was the only one who could stop it. But how? He had seen the command, the key to the launch, the one that had been written into his very DNA. All he had to do was activate it. All he had to do was think the command, and everything would be over. He could feel it deep in his chest. The power that surged through his cybernetic limbs, the power to destroy, the power to annihilate. It was all within him, but he didn't want that. Ethan's hands trembled as he ran them across the console, the cold metal of the buttons pressing against his skin. He had to stop it. He had to stop himself from becoming the monster they had made him to be, but it wasn't as simple as just flipping a switch, no. The failsafe was buried deeper than that. It was tied to his mind, to his very being. He could feel the tug of it, his body, his neural implants, all aligned with the countdown. The deeper he delved into the systems, the harder it became to pull away. It was as if the failsafe was an invisible force, an anchor holding him in place. His mind screamed at him to fight it, but every part of him, every ounce of his programming, resisted. His vision blurred with static as the countdown reached to 45. The time was slipping away. Suddenly, a loud alarm blared, cutting through the tension. Red lights flashed above him, and a voice crackled over the intercom. "Ethan, stop!" The voice was cold, commanding. It was the same voice that had spoken to him before, his creators. They were still watching, still controlling. "You cannot. Stop it. You were built for this. Your humanity is an illusion." The voice was almost pitying now, as though they truly believed he had no choice. He clenched his fists, his enhanced senses picking up the faint hum of the failsafe within him. The very thing that made him who he was. The very thing that threatened to destroy him. "No," he muttered under his breath. "No more." The countdown continued. 0:30. 0:29. The voice crackled again, sharper this time. "Don't you see? You are nothing more than a weapon. The moment you were created, you lost the right to make this decision." His mind recoiled against the words, a feeling of anger and defiance rising within him. He wasn't a weapon. He wasn't their puppet. He had feelings, he had memories, he had dreams, and he would not let them destroy him. Ethan pushed his mind deeper into the system, overriding the commands, overriding the programming. His body trembled, his circuits and nerves fighting him every step of the way, but he fought back with every ounce of strength he had left. The countdown was nearing its final seconds. He could hear the ticking of the clock louder now, like a drumbeat in his ears. Every second that passed felt like an eternity. He could do this. His fingers slammed down on the console, typing in the override command, the code to disrupt the launch sequence. He could feel the pulse of the failsafe within him, but he wasn't going to let it control him. Not anymore. No. His voice was firm this time, stronger than ever. "I choose." And with a final keystroke, Ethan activated the command. The countdown halted. The missile launch sequences froze. A heavy silence filled the room. He had done it. He had stopped the missiles for now, but the victory felt hollow. He had won the battle, but not the war. The missiles were halted, but the threat wasn't over. The world was still on the brink of destruction, and Ethan knew that as long as the failsafe still existed within him, it wasn't truly over. A sudden shiver ran down his spine. He wasn't alone. Turning quickly, his eyes scanned the room. The door to the control room slid open, and a shadow emerged from the darkness. It was a figure, one he knew all too well, a man, tall, stern, his face hidden in shadow. "Ethan," the man said, his voice deep, commanding. "You've made a mistake." Ethan's heart pounded as he recognized the man standing before him. It was General Horace Daniels, the mastermind behind the project that had created him. The man who had shaped Ethan into what he was. "You shouldn't have done that." Daniel's voice was colder than ever. "You're a weapon. You were designed for this. You think you can fight your programming? You think you can stop it?" Ethan stepped back, his body tensing. "I'm not just a weapon. I'm more than that." Daniel stepped forward, his eyes locking with Ethan's. "Then prove it. Stop the second missile, because I'm afraid your fight isn't over." The words hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. The realization hit him harder than the crash of any missile. A second missile was already in the air, and this one, Ethan couldn't stop it. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he stared at General Daniels. The man's cold gaze bore into him like a weapon, calm, calculating, and remorseless. For a moment, there was nothing but silence between them, the weight of the situation hanging heavily in the air. Ethan had stopped the countdown, stopped the missiles from launching, but now the real threat loomed larger than ever. A second missile was already in the air. He could feel it. His enhanced senses picked up every vibration in the ground, every shift in the air around him. The world outside was still teetering on the brink of annihilation, and he, Ethan, the boy who was meant to save it, was powerless to stop what had already been set into motion. His breath hitched as Daniels took a step forward. "You've made a mistake, Ethan," Daniels repeated, his voice smooth, like a snake coiling around its prey. "You don't understand what's at stake here. You never did." Ethan clenched. His fists, the hum of his cybernetic systems vibrating through his body. He wasn't going to let Daniels manipulate him. Not again. "I'm not a weapon," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the growing tension. "I'm not your tool to command." The general's lips curled into a thin, humorless smile. "That's where you're wrong. You were always my tool. You were always meant to be this way." Daniel stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "You and think you stopped the countdown. You think you have control. You've only delayed the inevitable. There's always a failsafe. Always." Ethan felt the cold weight of those words sink deep into his chest. The failure to stop the second missile was a blow to his resolve, but it was nothing compared to the realization that his entire life had been a lie. A lie manufactured by men like Daniels, who saw him only as a piece in a grander game, a piece that was now out of their control. The general turned and motioned toward the nearest wall, where a map of the globe was displayed on a large screen. Red dots blinked in various locations, marking key military bases, missile sites, and nuclear launch systems that were active. "Look at what you've done, Ethan," Daniel said softly, his tone almost regretful. "You think you're stopping something that doesn't exist anymore? The countdown you interrupted? It was just a distraction. We had already launched one missile, our backup plan. But that was just the beginning. There are more, too many for you to stop." Ethan's stomach dropped. The missile Daniels referred to wasn't the only one. It wasn't even the most dangerous one. The real weapon was already in the sky, heading toward a destination that could wipe out millions in a single strike. "And you can't stop it," Daniels added, watching Ethan closely, his smile widening. "Not unless you're willing to die." Ethan's hands clenched tighter, the heat of his anger building inside him. But even as his body ached with the desire to fight, his mind raced. Daniels wasn't lying. He could feel the pull of the second missile, the one that was still coming, and his programming. It was still there, still threatening to take control. He could feel it whispering at the edges of his consciousness. The failsafe. The one thing he'd been created for, the one thing that had always been a part of him. He wanted to shut it, out to reject it, but the truth was undeniable. The second missile wasn't just about stopping a war, it was about stopping him, and Daniels knew it. "Why?" Ethan finally asked, his voice low but filled with determination. "Why did you do it? Why make me? Why make a weapon when there were other ways?" Daniels didn't answer at first. He only turned back toward the screen, his expression unreadable. Then, after a long pause, he finally spoke. "Because, Ethan, humanity needs control. You were never meant to save the world. You were meant to ensure it never went too far. When the world becomes unmanageable, when nations turn on each other, you're the one who can end it all. You're the failsafe. You're the weapon no one can ever destroy." Ethan shook his head, struggling to hold back the wave of disgust that rose inside him. "You're wrong. I'm not just a weapon. I'm a person. No." Daniels cut him off, his voice harsh. "You're nothing more than a tool of destruction. You were created to keep the peace, or to end it. There's no other choice. The world is too broken, and you are the only solution." Ethan felt the weight of those words crush him. Was that all he was? A thing created to bring peace by force, by destruction? Was there no more humanity left inside him, or was it just a memory, a lie? "You were never meant to fight this war." "Ethan," Daniels's voice softened now, almost as if speaking to a child. "You were meant to end it." Ethan's vision blurred with the weight of his inner conflict. The second missile, the one that had already been launched, was now a ticking time bomb. He could feel it, feel the launch point, feel the trajectory in the very air around him. Every cell in his body screamed to stop it, to prevent it from reaching its target, but his programming, the failsafe embedded in him, told him that doing so would mean the end of everything. His death, the death of everyone, and the completion of the mission he had been born for. Ethan took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He was torn between his desire to be human, to protect life, and the cold, logical reality that he had been built to destroy. He wasn't sure how much of the boy he once was still remained. He wasn't sure if he had the strength to fight the very core of what he was. But there was one thing he knew for sure. He had to try. He turned away from Daniels, his hands still trembling with the raw power of his enhanced body. The map on the screen still displayed the launch sites, the countdowns, the missiles. But Ethan didn't look at them anymore. He focused on the one thing he could control, his own choices. "What are you going to do, Ethan?" Daniels asked, his voice a mixture of curiosity and menace. "You can't escape your fate. You were made for this." Ethan didn't answer. Instead, he stepped toward the door, his mind working at lightning speed. If there was one thing Daniels had overlooked, it was that Ethan had been designed to evolve, to adapt. The failsafe wasn't a singular code. It was part of a greater system, one that could be rewritten, reprogrammed, and Ethan could rewrite it. He had the power. He had the ability to override his programming, but there was a price. The cost was steep, perhaps too steep. To stop the missile, to rewrite the command, would mean sacrificing the last thread of humanity inside him. To fully sever his connection to the failsafe would be to destroy the very thing that had given him purpose. But was it worth it? As Ethan looked back at Daniels, his mind made the decision. He would rewrite his code, he would stop the missile, and he would no longer be a weapon. The clock was ticking, but for the first time in his life, Ethan finally had control. Ethan's fingers danced across the control panel, his mind a storm of thoughts as he worked with lightning precision. His heart was racing, each beat a reminder of the urgency that pressed down on him like a heavy weight. General Daniels's words echoed in his mind, a bitter mantra that he could not shake. "You were never meant to save the world. You were meant to end it." He fought to push those words aside, to focus on the task before him. The seconds were ticking down, the countdown to destruction growing closer. The second missile was on its way, heading toward its target. The missile that could level entire cities in the blink of an eye. Ethan wasn't just fighting a war. He was fighting the very essence of his existence. He was born to destroy. But now, he would rewrite the code of his own fate. The control room hummed with the quiet sound of technology whirring, but in Ethan's mind, the noise was deafening. Each pulse of his enhanced body seemed to send shockwaves through his senses, intensifying his every thought, his every action. The failsafe that had been written into his body from the moment he was created, it was still there. But it wasn't permanent. He could rewrite it. He could change it. But the cost was staggering. The deeper he delved into his programming, the more he felt it, the overwhelming power to end it all, the power to launch a devastating strike that would obliterate everything in its path. It was tempting, almost intoxicating. The possibility of total destruction lay at his fingertips, but so did the possibility of saving the world. Could he do it? Could he rewrite his purpose? Could he overcome the failsafe that had been embedded into every fiber of his being? The command codes flashed before his eyes, the layers of encryption that had been placed in his systems to ensure that no one, not even Ethan himself, could override the global missile launch. But he wasn't just anyone. He was more than just the machine they had created. The keys clattered under his fingers, his enhanced vision rapidly scanning through the data, decrypting layer after layer of security. His heartbeat in perfect sync. With his systems, each thud a reminder that time was running out. There were only moments left. He had to make the choice. The cold reality of the situation pressed in on him, and for a moment, Ethan hesitated. The question loomed large before him. If he rewrote the code, would he still be Ethan? Or would he be lost forever? Just another weapon in the hands of the people who had created him. He couldn't afford to think about that right now. Not when the lives of billions were at stake. His fingers froze on the console as a new data stream appeared on the screen. It was a report, a location, a hidden base, another missile silo. "No," Ethan whispered under his breath. His enhanced senses confirmed the report. The rogue faction had activated a third missile, one that Ethan had not accounted for. It was far away, but it was coming. And it was far worse than the others. The rogue faction, a secret government division that had gone rogue, had activated this missile on their own accord. It was designed to trigger a catastrophic chain reaction that would cripple global infrastructure, throwing the world into an irreversible state of chaos. The missile wasn't just about destruction. It was designed to ensure that nothing could ever be rebuilt. He had no choice. Ethan's hands flew over the controls once more, typing commands faster than any human could. His cybernetic mind was working at full capacity, analyzing the incoming threat, calculating the trajectory of the missile, and looking for a way to stop it. His thoughts collided with his programming, and he fought to break free from the logic that had been instilled in him. The systems pushed back against him, but he refused to relent. The failsafe was still there, pulsing through him like a heartbeat. But now, Ethan was determined to break it. Suddenly, the systems froze. Ethan's heart skipped a beat as the console went dark. A chill washed over him, his mind flashing with fear. He'd almost reached the final override, but now he had been locked out. It was a fail-safe within a fail-safe. Someone else was controlling the system from the outside. "You're too late." The voice was unmistakable. "General Daniels." Ethan spun around, his eyes narrowing as the general appeared in the doorway of the control room. His face was shadowed, his figure silhouetted against the dim emergency lighting that bathed the room in an eerie glow. Behind him, a team of soldiers, their faces covered in military masks, stood motionless, waiting for Daniels' command. "You think you can rewrite your fate?" Daniels said, his voice dripping with derision. "You think you can break the chains I put on you? You were never meant to be free." Ethan's body tensed. "I'm not your weapon." The words were a declaration, a final stand. "You're exactly what I made you to be." Daniels stepped forward, a smirk playing at the corner of his lips. "You were designed to end the world, Ethan. Whether you want to admit it or not, you're nothing more than a tool of destruction. And you can't change that." "I can." Ethan's voice was steady now, his resolve hardening. "I will change it." Daniels raised a hand, signaling for the soldiers to step forward. "You're a threat, Ethan. A threat to everything I've worked for." Ethan's mind raced as he surveyed the soldiers surrounding the room. He was faster, stronger, and smarter than any of them. But they had one thing he didn't: numbers. And Daniels had the upper hand with his control of the systems. It didn't matter. Ethan was done being controlled. Without warning, he sprang into action. His body moved with the precision of a predator, his enhanced limbs striking faster than the eye could follow. In an instant, he took out two of the soldiers, disarming them with brutal efficiency. The others hesitated, thrown off by his speed, but Ethan knew he didn't have much time. He couldn't let Daniels get the upper hand. Not now. Ethan's fist connected with the last soldier's chest, sending him crashing into the wall with a sickening thud. He turned to Daniels, whose eyes burned with fury. "It's over, Daniels!" Ethan's voice was calm, but there was no mistaking the deadly edge to it. Daniels stared at him, his face a mask of rage. "You're too late!" Ethan could feel the pressure mounting as the systems locked down again, preventing any further access to the missile override. But in that moment, he realized something. He didn't need the system to stop the missile. He needed to make the system believe he was the failsafe. His fingers flew over the console again, entering the final code. The code that would make him the ultimate weapon in every way. He would become the only one who could stop the missile from reaching its target. He would take control of the global systems himself, and the failsafe would no longer be in anyone's hands but his. He hit enter. A surge of energy coursed through him, overwhelming his senses as his body absorbed the data. The world seemed to slow down for a moment, and then everything snapped into place. The missile countdowns froze. The rogue missile, still airborne, was diverted. The system had been taken over. Ethan was now in control. But as the control room fell silent, he felt something shift deep within him. The power was his. The world was now at his mercy. The question lingered, could he truly save the world, or would he become the very thing he had fought against? The control room was eerily quiet. The hum of the systems, once a background drone to Ethan's thoughts, had now become a steady, comforting rhythm. His fingers hovered over the console, and for the first time in his life, Ethan felt the weight of power coursing through him. It wasn't just about stopping missiles anymore. It was about holding the world's fate in his hands. He'd rewritten his code, taken control of the system. The rogue missile that had been launched toward a remote target had been diverted. Its course changed, and its countdown halted. The military-grade security system that Daniels had so carefully crafted was now under Ethan's command. But it wasn't enough. Ethan knew that the rogue missile wasn't the only weapon out there. And as long as Daniels was alive, there would always be another. Always another chance for this cycle to repeat. Daniels had orchestrated this entire disaster. He had manipulated governments, turned entire factions against each other, all for the sake of control. The general was a cancer, spreading destruction wherever he went, and it was time to end it. Ethan's gaze flicked toward the unconscious soldiers lying in various states of disarray across the room. His enhanced vision took in their every detail, the slight rise and fall of their chests, the pooling blood that stained the concrete floor. He had never meant to hurt them, but in the end, they were just another part of the machine that Daniels had built. Tools, soldiers, dispensable. You've won for now, Ethan. Daniels' voice cut through the silence, cold and venomous. But you don't understand. You've only delayed the inevitable. You've only delayed what is coming. Ethan turned to face him. General Daniels was standing near the doorway, his posture rigid, his eyes hard. His mouth was set in a grim line, but Ethan could see the faintest flicker of something behind his eyes. Anger, maybe fear. Fear of Ethan's potential. Fear that he couldn't control him anymore. You've lost, Daniels, Ethan said, his voice low but filled with certainty. The missiles are stopped. The countdowns are over. You've lost your control. Daniels shook his head slowly, a wry smile curling on his lips. I think you're mistaken, Ethan. You see, I didn't create you to be my puppet. I created you to be the one thing that could stop the chaos. Ethan's mind reeled. What are you talking about? I'm the one who's stopping it now. I'm rewriting everything you built. I'm ending it. The general stepped forward, his face inches from Ethan's. No, Ethan, what you don't understand is that the real weapon, the one I created you for, isn't in those missiles. It's in you. For a moment, time seemed to slow. Ethan's enhanced systems, capable of processing information at near-light speeds, couldn't make sense of the words. What do you mean? He asked, his voice cracking slightly with confusion. Daniels laughed softly, a dark, mirthless sound that echoed in the empty room. You think you're the one controlling the missile systems now? Think again. The failsafe I implanted in you, it's not just tied to global security, it's tied to you, your body, your mind. You've just become the final launch trigger. Ethan's mind raced. A chill ran down his spine as the implications hit him like a freight train. The very thing he had been trying to fight against, the failsafe that he had reprogrammed, thinking he had broken free of it, was still active. The override he just implemented, it had locked him into the system. His body was the last trigger. The final countdown was encoded in his DNA. He felt it then, deep within him, the pulse of it, the power, the code, the kill switch. No, Ethan whispered, as if saying it aloud might somehow reverse the reality. No, I was supposed to be the one to stop it. I was supposed to save humanity. Daniel's face softened just for a moment, the faintest trace of something resembling sympathy flashing in his eyes. Ethan, you were never meant to save humanity. You were made to keep it from destroying itself. And now you are the weapon. You are the failsafe. You are the key. Ethan's chest tightened. His thoughts, once so clear, now seemed muddled, tangled in an overwhelming web of confusion and horror. The very reason he had fought so hard, the very reason he had believed he could change, had it all been a lie? This is what you really are. Daniel's voice was low, almost tender now. This is who you are. You were made for destruction. You were made to end everything when it becomes too much. And that time has come, Ethan. Ethan's hands trembled as he pressed them against the console. His breath came in ragged gasps as he fought to gain control of his mind. The failsafe was triggered. His body was wired to initiate the countdown, to launch the final missile, to fulfill the one thing he had been created to do. The system in front of him flickered, showing the missile's trajectory, heading straight for a critical target. His mind screamed at him to stop it. He couldn't let it happen. He couldn't let himself become the monster they wanted him to be. But every part of him, every inch of his programming, urged him to follow through. You're the one who can... Stop it, Ethan! Daniel's voice was filled with both awe and menace. But you're also the one who can end it. Ethan's eyes darted between the console and Daniel's. His heart was racing, and his entire being screamed for him to find another way. He couldn't be this. He couldn't be just a weapon anymore. He was more than this. But the systems didn't care. His hands hovered over the console once more, trembling. He had to stop the launch. He had to stop himself from carrying out the order that was embedded in his DNA. But as his fingers brushed the keys, his body fought him, the failsafe, taking over once again. And then he heard it, the sound that froze him in place, a countdown. A mechanical voice, cold and robotic, counting down the final seconds. Missile launch in T-minus 30 seconds. Ethan's mind shattered in that instant. The overwhelming flood of code, of programming, of power, it all hit him at once. He couldn't. Stop it, not now. No! Ethan shouted, slamming his fist against the console, but it was too late. The countdown continued, its mechanical voice filling the room with cold precision. He had no choice. His body was the trigger. The failsafe had already activated. It wasn't just a system anymore. It was him. The missile was already in the air, heading toward its target, and the one person who could stop it was no longer in control. The countdown was deafening. To minus 10 seconds. Ethan could feel the cold weight of inevitability pressing down on him. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat a desperate cry against the programming that had been embedded in him. His hands trembled, hovering over the console that controlled the final missile launch. His body, the living trigger. Missile launch in T-minus 5. The voice was mechanical, uncaring. The system had fully taken over now. Ethan could feel it in every fiber of his being. The failsafe, the code, the mission. It was too late. The missile was already in the air. The trajectory irreversible. The target locked. His mind screamed for a way out. The boy inside him, the part of him that longed for peace, for life, fought against the cold logic of the machine he had become. He wasn't supposed to be this. He wasn't supposed to end it all. But his body had been created to do just that. T-minus 3 seconds. In that moment, a decision rose within Ethan's chest, a choice that would either condemn the world or break the cycle of destruction. Could he truly stop this? Could he undo the failsafe that had been built into him? The very thing that made him human, or as Daniels had so cruelly said, a tool of annihilation. His mind flashed to everything he had lost. His humanity, his family, the boy who once dreamed of a better world. And then he thought of the people out there, the innocent lives, the ones who had no idea that this war was happening. Could he, in the end, break free from the destiny that had been forced upon him? The countdown continued. Ethan's hand moved on its own, shaking with the weight of the choice. The system was forcing him to comply, to obey, but in the depths of his mind, he heard the echo of his own voice, the words he had said before. "I'm not a weapon. I'm not your tool." Ethan closed his eyes. He would not be the weapon they had created him to be. He would not be the one to end the world. With the last ounce of his will, he reached for the override control, bypassing the systems that had locked him into place. His body screamed in protest as the code fought against him, as his own programming tried to stop him from making the final choice. T-1 second. The voice was a drumbeat in his mind. There was no more time. But then, a surge of energy coursed through him. He felt the connection snap, the final code fragment, the piece of him that had been tied to the failsafe, unlocked in an instant. His enhanced mind tore through the last layers of encryption, overriding the kill switch that had been his prison. The countdown stopped. The missile's trajectory shifted. He had done it. For a moment, Ethan didn't know if he was dreaming or if the world had truly changed. The missile had been diverted. The war had been stopped. The apocalypse had been averted. But as the cold silence filled the room, Ethan felt a hollow emptiness inside. The victory didn't feel like a victory. It wasn't a moment of triumph. It was a reminder of everything he had lost, of the boy he had been and the machine he had become. The failsafe was broken. He had done what no one thought possible. But now, as the lights in the control room flickered back on and the sirens ceased their blaring, Ethan understood something. He was free, not just from the code, from the failsafe, but from the guilt, from the doubt, from the endless question of whether he could ever be more than a weapon. For the first time, Ethan felt the weight of being human again. He looked at the blank screen in front of him, watching the global systems that had been locked for so long now flicker back to life. The war was over. The world was still standing. But for Ethan, the battle had just begun. As he turned to leave the control room, the door slid open, revealing General Daniels standing in the hallway. The man's eyes were hollow, his expression resigned. "You did it, didn't you?" Daniels said, softly, almost as if speaking to himself. "You stopped it." Ethan didn't answer right away. His gaze was hard, steady. The memories of the man who had created him, the man who had tried to shape him into a weapon, flooded his thoughts, but they were no longer relevant. "It's over," Ethan said, his voice firm. "You lost." Daniels didn't move, his gaze shifting downward. For a moment it seemed as if he might say something more, but he simply turned away, walking into the dark hallway. Ethan stood there for a long moment, watching him go. He could have stopped him. He could have ended Daniels's life right there, avenged all the pain and suffering he had caused. But that wasn't who Ethan was anymore. He wasn't a weapon. The world outside was waiting. It was broken, yes, but it was still alive. And Ethan had the power to heal it, not as a tool of destruction, but as a force of change. The sun had risen, casting its first rays over a war-torn world. Ethan took a step forward into the light. And for the first time, he didn't feel like a machine. He was human.